Yeah, I have 7:30, so I'm going to get us going. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's September 20th Committee of the Whole meeting. We have 4 items on the agenda to cover. As a quick reminder, the floor will be open to the audience for 20 minutes to address the City Council on matters that are on this evening's agenda. We ask that persons wishing to address the City Council keep their comments to 5 minutes in length, and comments must be addressed to the City Council as a whole through the mayor, and of course, profanity will not be accepted. Moving on to our first item here, since we do have 4. The first item we'll cover is the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget, and for this, we'll call up Finance Director Molly Talkington. Molly?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We bring to you, Manager Sabo and I, the proposed budget for fiscal year 2023. Just as a reminder, your budget is a policy document, a communication tool, and a financial transparency document. So we try to work all of those aspects into one document. The City of Rolling Meadows has been very successful at this, and we've been a Triple Crown winner with the GFOA awards on our audit, our budget, and our popular financial report. So what's our budget landscape this year? So I was kind of calling it like strengthening our foundation, right? We're looking at where we are now and where we want to be in the next few years. To start with that, we look at the economic climate. And so right now, everyone knows inflation's going up. CPI has been the highest it's been in years. So that's the graph to the right. The 12-month kind of percentage change, you can see where COVID, it kind of dropped down in 2020, but then now it's spiked in 2022. This is through July. So that plays a factor when we're looking at, where are our costs going to be? What do we need to factor in when we're looking at where we're budgeting in the upcoming year? And the Flash Index, I think this is probably new to this group, but I used it a lot at City Champaign and I really liked it. It is kind of a really quick, that's why they call it Flash, look at where the state is overall, and it really relies on where are the income receipts coming in, where are they at that moment in time. And you can see that with the red line, whether the state is contracting, so if it's below 100, or if it's growing or expanding and it's above that 100 threshold, it's where the red line is. So you can see where COVID dropped 92.8, dropped really low. The state was contracting. We've come back up. We're coming out of the pandemic. We're starting to see, the home sales and more purchases, and the economy is getting better. But as you can see in those last few months, we're starting to trail back down again. So the state is still growing, and we're at 104.5 currently, but it's starting to slow down a little bit. So I like this index because it kind of gives you a really quick visual of what's going on in the state. So for the budget, we look at what are our key recommendations this year. No rate increase to utilities and refuse. We want to remain fiscally prudent, keep police, fire, and IMRF levies the same as the last year's levies. Target funding to local roads and public works operations. So we have a property tax increase of 1% total, and $127,810 of that goes to local roads, the annual street program, and then just a small portion goes to public works operations at $16,000. And we also have a transfer of $1.05 million from the general fund to the local roads fund. So we're really targeting the streets with this budget. We're also using the one-time funding to allow us some time to develop kind of financial stability plan, right? I'm fairly new to the city. Your city manager's been here since January. We really put a lot of effort into this budget, but really want to work with City Council in the upcoming year to look at a plan that doesn't look just at year 1, but where we're going to be through year 5, and set a kind of a plan for the 24 budget that says, here's where we're going to be for 24, but we've set stuff in place that will help us for year 5 with that outlook. So we want to take some time using the one-time money and then give us time to make thoughtful decisions by developing a financial stability plan. So we have what we call a pool, risk management pool. We're using funding in our risk management pool to cover premium costs, so we're able to kind of save the other funds $623,000 in the current year, in 2023. We're reducing those chargebacks to that liability insurance fund. Again, that saves that other funds. And then we're transferring $1.5 million from our health insurance pool to the general fund. We're also looking at our ARPA funding, which is $3.2 million. That is our next topic for this evening. And whatever the direction is at our next topic, we will incorporate into this budget, and that's what we'll publish when we do like the public hearing. It'll incorporate your decisions tonight on ARPA funding. And we have a pending in our bank account that second tranche is there, so funding has now hit our books. And then overall, like I said, to really take some time and thought, working with City Council and staff for us to develop a financial stability plan, so we have, a much better idea of what we're going to do from year 1 through year 5, starting with that 2024 budget. So when we look at our revenues and we look at all of our funds, the total for 2023 is $71.8 million. And your large revenues here is your property tax levy at 24%. We do have charge for services like the refuse and utility funds, that's 23%. Local taxes is sales tax, home rule tax, those types, and intergovernmental income tax at 10%. So this is kind of your diversity of how your revenues or how they're made up for the city. And this is all funds, so it incorporates general fund all the way through your utilities. So our first kind of recommendation is no increase to the rates for utilities and refuse. The last increase for utilities was in FY 2017, and the last one for refuse was in 2014. So right now, the rate for refuse is $29.95 for 30 days with what you're charged. And when we look at the graph right below that, you can see what we have for the 21 actual, 22 estimate, and then what we're proposing for the budget. So the refuse revenues do increase some because that your 2022 year feels a little bit of the effect of our hold on water shutoff. So you have kind of a little dip in our revenues there. So 2023 is showing some of that growth back, but then it also includes what we did with the host tipping fees. For council direction, we moved that from the general fund into the refuse fund, and we moved the transfer station revenues into this fund. So that's also the kind of next tick up for the revenues on the refuse fund. And the fund balance target is kind of that between that yellowish orange line and red line. And so right now our fund balance, that kind of blue area there, is below what our fund balance target is. So our target is to have 30%, 15 to 30% of our expenditures, and we're below that in this fund right now. So this is a good one that we're going to look at in that kind of financial stability plan. Same with utilities. We're looking at the revenues. We do see some growth there again because we're now back to fully implementing the shutoffs as well. It's starting right now. And your biggest cost in utilities fund, and I highlighted it a little bit here, is our agreement for water purchase. So it goes up 5%. So you can see it was 3.9 in 21, it goes up to 4.1, and then 4.3 million. It's a little small in my handout. But that is the largest cost we see in this fund, and you also have, capital and utilities. So again, we're looking at how do those revenues stack up to expenditures, and right now expenditures are still outpacing your revenues in this fund. We're just falling below the fund balance target that is recommended, is one of the policies with this budget, to have the utilities fund at 25% of the expenditures. So I put that in the red line there, and you can see kind of that blue fund balance is coming below it into 2023. The next recommendation is our property tax levy. This is kind of the breakdown by every levy that you have. When you get your bill, it's broken down into the different sections. So we're keeping police and fire protection the same as last year. Police pension, fire pension, and IRF pension the same. And then that public works operation has a slight increase at the $16,000, but then the rest of that 1% increase is recommended to go to the annual street program, and so that's the increase of the $128,000. The last overall levy increase was in 2019, and we also levy the library is part of the city as a component unit. So we accept their budget, and as the council, we look at their levy, and they are requesting to go up 5%, but you will have more information and detail on the library levy and their budget at the October Committee of the Whole. So we'll have more information in there. What becomes important on that is when we have to do the public hearing and publish kind of your black box notice on the property tax, the library is included in the overall notification. So here's our dollar bill. We're 16% of the total. So when someone has, their tax bill, we're only really a small fraction of what we're paying as a total homeowner. So I looked at kind of what does that mean, right? So we can say we're 16%. What does that mean when you get your bill? So we look at your equalized assessed valuation for the city of Rolling Meadows as a whole. So I put that together, and you can see the different categories. Is residential is the lightest green, the middle's commercial, and the top's industrial. But that commercial portion is growing, especially in the last 3 years. We're seeing kind of a growth in that area. So each time we levied that same dollar amount, the actual rate for a homeowner has been going down because we've been spreading kind of our tax levy over a larger EAV. So as a homeowner, if your home had a median value, and I looked at 10 different sites and took the median, because they're kind of all different, I came up with 277,450. So if that's the median home value, your taxable value is 33.333% at 92,482. So if you apply our tax rate to that, your 2018 bill would have been $1,735. Your 2019 bill would have gone down to $1,502, and your 2020 bill would have gone down again to $1,490. That's assuming nothing changed in the value of your home. So, okay, let's look at a 2% increase. Let's say in 2020, you're reassessed and you got a 2% increase. So at that same rate, your bill would have gone up slightly. So you would have gone from 1,502 to 1,520. So that's kind of how that rate gets applied to how that equalized assessed valuation is spread over the city. So as we add those commercial and industrial buildings and new opportunities to bring business into the city, we're helping spread that tax rate across more people in our city. So now on to our general fund revenues. In total, the general fund supports our core city operations, right? This is where you see police and fire funding, our big public safety, you have public works, administration, finance, Board of Fire Police, our committees. This supports kind of that core of what you consider what is government. So that's our general fund. So for 2023, the revenues are at $36.4 million. There's some steady growth to these revenues. And on the chart on the right, you can kind of see the breakdown of how the revenues are received in each year. So we've gone up from $34.6 million in that what we thought we'd get in 22. We're thinking we'll get 35.5 to end the 22 year, and then go up to 26.4 for the 23 year. Again, this reflects that moving some of those revenues to the refuse fund, and it also has the one-time transfer in from the health insurance pool. Now, if we look at that kind of by some key revenues, I do think when we look at that assessed EAV, we'll see some more growth coming for 2022. It's just not finalized yet, so I don't have that number. But I think we will see some more growth in the city. And we also, so if you see your building permits are increasing, right there, the blue, 2023 is the bottom bar. So building permits are increasing. So we're building more EAV in, with those permits, you build more, you're building more EAV value to your property. Food and beverage taxes are starting to come back a little bit higher. We're seeing more people going out to eat, and that's not always necessarily people that live in town. You get me going out for lunch. So, you're also, that's also a tax that gets shared with people who visit our town. So it's not always just on the resident. Same with hotel motel tax, that's usually not residents, right? These people coming to town visiting. We do see growth in this as well with the opening of the new hotel. And then income tax and personal property replacement tax. there is kind of a slight decline coming in 2023. Part of this is just looking at where incomes are, people shifting jobs, how corporate, the corporate taxes, there were some changes made at the state that kind of bumped up 2022 year, and it'll bring 2023 back down a little, but it's still greater than where we were in 2021. And then, of course, I kind of lumped together all your sales tax with state and home rule and the local use tax. And so there's growth showing there as well. Local roads funds. This is really where we're targeting kind of that one-time money. Because this is the fund, right? This is where if you have a pothole and you want it fixed, well, we have, funding in this fund to try to fix those things. So right now, the 2023 budget is showing an increase because of that one-time funding and revenues. We're showing that transfer in of the 1.05 million, and we're showing the increase in the levy. The increase in the levy is a recurring fund, so recurring money can help over the next few years. The one-time money really is just for this year, and we won't see it again in future years. So it's helping us get a little bit more time to bring the fund balance into this fund to basically a neutral state for the 2023 year, but then it gives us time to use the 2023 year to develop a plan to address that fund balance in the blue going down in 2024. So this is going to allow us that time to plan and come up with a way to fund our local roads going forward. Our expenditures by category. This is in all funds. Again, here's our breakdown. Like I said, the general fund really is our core operations, and core operations are the people on the streets that are out there doing the work. So we have a significant portion of our funding in all funds goes to salary and benefits at 41%. But if you add that with the police and fire pension, we're at 52% of our total expenditures. And so those are really kind of what holds the city. How we get our expenditure, how we get the work done. And then we have capital outlay and contractual services are our next big categories. So when we look at salary and benefits, the increases are usually tied to union contracts. So we have those between 2 and 3% this year. That's built into here based on those. The non-bargaining unit is built within that contract range. Benefits are provided based on what we talk to our vendors and our providers. So we are seeing some increases in health insurance, but we've been having good, we're not seeing as many health insurance claims and stuff, so we're having good returns, so our premium's gone down a little, but we still have an increase in the overall cost. IMRF, the employer rate's reduced. Some of that is just turnover in staff, so we're seeing more of a change from tier 1 to tier 2, but it's also because we're getting better returns at IMRF, so they did really well last year, and it gets built into what our annual contribution is. And then police and fire pension contributions remain level to 2022. So staffing changes. This budget actually is a reduction in headcount of 2, but we are making some shifts or repurposing of positions. So the 22 budget had a facility supervisor. We're repurposing that to the assistant city manager, community development director. We had a patrol position. Well, we had 2. One's becoming a school resource officer, and the other is administrative sergeant. The school resource officer will come with some reimbursements from the school district. The meter reader position, Public Works, is vacant, and we're moving that to a management analyst position. And overall, we've decreased some seasonal staffing. Capital projects. So this is 13% of our overall spend. This is what I think our residents see the most when we're out there doing the work on those streets. They see us in action, right? Public Works is out there being busy. And so we had looked at our improvement plan a few meetings ago, and so this is really following that. We're looking at the annual street program is really our biggest portion of our capital projects at just short of 18%, and that's where we really were targeting that funding. But you do have our vehicle replacement plan is still in here, equipment purchases, building and land, and infrastructure. So there's lots of different areas in which we target that capital funding, and if anyone wants more detail on it, we do have the capital improvement plan posted on our website already. The general fund, by category. First, it's 38.1 million for expenditures by category. Salary and benefits in general fund becomes larger than all funds at 61%, and our pension funding at 21%. This is because, like I said, it's core operations. This is where we have, police and fire funding, where we have most of the people that are doing the work for the city, where our other funds are allotted the capital expenditures. And then by department, police and fire are your largest departments, and then public works. So when we look at all the funds, we look at the fund balance. And I like to call the fund balance your savings account, like when you're at home. You save up to buy a car, so you put it in that savings account, and then the year you want to spend it, that's the year it goes to your checking account, right? So the beginning fund balance is your savings. Your revenues are what's coming into your checking. Your expenditures is what's going out of your checking, and your ending fund balance is what you're kind of keeping in that savings account. So we do have some planned use of this fund balance. The general fund we're using, the transfer to the local roads fund, so there are targeted kind of planned uses. Motor fuel tax, we had funding for a grant that we saved for 2 years, and now this is the year to spend that funding. E911, we're using savings. We didn't recommend a levy increase from there. That fund's balance is in a good condition right now, but we're going to take next year to look at what the needs are going forward with the body camera purchase and some other radios items in there, and it gives us a little more time to look at that fund. A liability insurance, that's intentional, so we can give other funds a little bit of a one-time relief. The vehicle and equipment fund, just like I said at your home, same thing here. We save up, we purchase, and then we save up again. So that shifts each year depending on what vehicles and equipment we're purchasing. The Gulf Road TIF, this really is a budgeted plan, but we will not end up spending more than what we get in property taxes on this fund. So it's just a matter of what we get in, what we turn around for our redevelopment agreement. We'll go out. And debt service fund is based on our debt service needs. There's just a little bit of fund balance I'm using because we've earned some interest. We're using it towards the payment instead of transferring that fully from the general fund. I think it's only like, well, it's right there. It's only $10,000 left in there. So we're trying to bring down that fund balance just to cover the debt service payments. But there are funds that the expenditures are outpacing the revenues. So these are what I call the funds that are structurally imbalanced, right? We want to use this time in 2023 to build that financial stability plan, is specifically really focusing on these funds. So the general fund is, while it's in fund balance policy range right now, if we stay status quo, if you look at it a longer term, I do think we're going to start to go through the fund balance. And so we need to look at that and look at that on a 5-year focus during the year and see what we need to do to kind of bring those revenues in line with where we're at in expenditures, or what we want to do to the expenditures, bring them in line with revenues, because you always have kind of that choice to make between each of these funds. Same with refuse. We're outpacing our expenditures, are outpacing our revenues, and again, we haven't raised rates since 2014 in that fund. Utility is just starting, but when we looked at the 5-year plan of the utilities and the CIP, it continues to have the expenditures grow more than the revenues. And again, a lot of this is the 5% assumed increase in our water purchase. Building and land is kind of following that same trend, as well as local roads. So local roads, we've managed to kind of solve for 2023, but starting in 2024, we need to look at where we're at again with that fund. And then fund balance policies. You already have general fund, E91, garage, refuse fund policies in place as of now. So general fund, you're at the higher end of the range, you're within policy. E911, we're above range. The garage fund, we're within the range. And refuse fund, we're below range. So that one, the range was 30 to 50%, we're at 16. Utilities fund, this is a new policy recommended for adoption. It's based on best practices, and what GFOA recommends and what other cities do is maintaining at least 25% of operating expenditures. So for 2023, that'd be 2.2 million. We're at 1.5 million, so we'd be below that target in this proposed budget. The liability insurance fund, that would be a new policy for Adoption, this would be to reserves to equal 1 year's payment of insurance plus a little reserve for unforeseen liability payments. That'd be approximately $1 million. Right now, we're in that budget at target. The health insurance fund, policy recommended for adoption, it's reserved equal to 1/2 year's payment of insurance, approximately $2.25 million. We're at 2.7, so we're above there. But on liability and insurance funds, if you look at the proposed budget, I've added what they call the excess surplus information from our pool. So we're part of a risk pool for liability insurance to that fund balance statement, so you can see, what portion we're using of that excess pool, and then how that makes the fund balance in total look. So the 1 million is what we have here at the city, and then I have the additional amounts showing in that budget fund statement. Health insurance, the same thing. They have what they call a terminal reserve, and so they have a recommended amount that we need to keep of just over $350,000, and that adjusts each year depending on how many people we have in the pool. So there's a little bit of a calculation, but we do have more, so I show where we anticipate using some of that reserve and then the total for both of those funds. So our next steps really are, we have the ARPA recommendation, the next item, and then we will publish the annual budget and property tax levy with the public hearing notices on the 29th. So we'll come back on October 11th to have those 2 public hearings, and then have budget resolutions pertaining to those 3 new fund balance policies. October 18th, you'll have the library come and present their budget and tax levy. November 8th, we'll have the first reading on the city and library tax levy, and then on the city's budget ordinance. And you'll also have a resolution pertaining to city compensation plan. November 15th would be a committee of the whole if there's a need for it. And then November 22nd is where we do the second reading of the city and library tax levy, second reading of the budget ordinance, and adopt the budget and accept the library's budget. And then January 1st, our new fiscal year begins. So with that, we have abilities for residents to provide public input. They're welcome to come to any of those meetings that were just outlined and join us in person, but they also have the opportunity to watch us live or call or email and provide input in those meetings. The public inspection will be on the website, and a hard copy will be at Finance and at the library. So if someone wants to come see the proposed book or the tax levy on hard copy, they can. And now it's really, what's council's input? How do you feel about the proposed budget?
Thank you, Finance Director Talkington. Manager Sabo, do you have anything you'd like to incorporate at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to commend the staff. This is a collaborative effort amongst our staff to put together their annual budget proposals. Certainly, as Finance Director Talkington had mentioned, our ultimate intention here is to create stability, and so that as we come back and have these financial discussions with the council moving forward into the future, a lot of this is not reactive, it's proactive and really planned and predictable. So I appreciate the council's and the mayor's input into the budgeting process, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Manager Sabo. Again, the appreciation that the council has and myself have for you guys putting this together, much appreciated. I know we've all individually had opportunities to meet with you guys in advance of tonight's presentation, and we appreciate that. Are there questions from the council? Alderman O'Brien, then Bessetti.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, first of all, continued thanks to Molly and Manager Sabo for the last several weeks. I know Molly and I have had numerous conversations, and it's more of just a comment, not a question. I don't want to sound like a broken record. My concern is I really like seeing the stability plan. That really put myself at ease. But just as I was looking at things, is we're shifting, and this is what I confirmed with Molly and staff earlier. We're doing a lot of fund transfers, which they're there for. 11 of them are planned use fund transfers, and about $3.86 million between one-time fund transfers and also one-time movements, plus still coming up $3.9 million short in terms of expenses outpacing revenues. That's just under $8 million that we're operating from in a deficit. I'm going to say it's deficit spending. It's not, because a lot of them are planned usage. I'm comfortable knowing we're going to look at refuse and utilities since those rates are there. That's just, we've got a lot of great plans thanks to the capital improvement committee and things like that going forward. I just want to make sure we have money to do it, to keep making our residents happy and things like that for the services they hear. So while it's the 1% property tax levy increase proposal for 143,000, that's a drop in the bucket when we're moving funds or taking one-time withdrawals for almost 4 million and still coming up almost 4 million short in a budget. That's just my angst for the future. Really glad to see the stability plan, but that's just my angst of, we've got a lot of great plans, we just have to make sure that we have money to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Bessetti.
My comments pretty much in line with Alderman O'Brien's. And thank you to staff and city manager for all your hard work. And the transparency we had this year with the meetings were very, very good and very informative. The funds, the enterprise funds that are below budget, below the targets. Let's take the refuse fund, for example, as a 30% bottom. We're 16% below, so we're basically at 14% of our.
Flip-flop, we're at 16, we're 14% below.
Oh, that's the way that
Yeah.
should have been read?
Yeah.
Okay. So either way, we're pretty far below. The question that I have is, looking at this in a little bit longer term, how are we going to get it back to where it needs to be without approaching the topic of raising the refuse fund, the garbage, or even the utility bills for the utility fund?
So, like any budget, you have two sides of the coin, the expenses as well as the revenues. As part of the stability process and just evaluating the overall refuse services that we offer, that includes the transfer station expenses and revenues, all of the different functions and services that we offer. Our intention is to take a look at those holistically and see how we can continue to provide the services to our residents at the level that they've been at, while at the same time protecting and continuing to regrow that fund balance. Now, those are going to be iterative conversations we have with the council, and depending on how we ultimately review and analyze the cash flows and the net positions, that'll involve a iterative process, as I said. There's different approaches to rates. Sometimes you can look at user fees or charge for certain services. There is also, as I said, on the expense side, so evaluating what we're paying to haul our trash away when we take it to the transfer facility. So there's a number of different components. We don't have the exact answer for the council this evening at this time, but that's certainly something that we're going to be evaluating holistically.
Well, thank you, Manager Sabo. And one of the other points of conversation that were brought up with these concerns, I'm pretty sure all of us expressed similar concerns along these lines, but the cadence that we're typically used to in terms of budget conversation and meetings and the sequential calendar of events that we have for these discussions, those are going to change moving forward. There's going to be a lot more interaction among the city manager and the finance director with the city council in terms of evaluating needs for the city, understanding what services we're providing and the relevance and whether or not those need to be augmented. And so this is just one part of a transformation that's occurring here in City Hall in terms of how active we are as a council throughout the duration of the year and not just at these set intervals of time when we talk about the budget.
Okay, so listening to that, basically, you're pretty much going to be looking at all the ins and outs of the fund and seeing if there's any opportunities, low-hanging fruit there. For example, maybe the transfer station, there might be more revenue or lower expenses as far as our garbage being disposed. Those types of things that we need to explore. We need to do our due diligence and look at that. So for the meantime, increasing would not be something that we should broach at this point until we've done those steps.
Exactly, and that's the proposal, is that we hold steady for now. It gives us the opportunity. Right now, the fund balance, while below the fund balance target, still allows us to continue the operation of our refuse services in the community. It gives us the time, though, to build in the analysis and to come up with the financial plan so that we can come back to the council and have that conversation of, over an extended period of time, how do we get ourselves back into a funded position?
Right, I just think that as we go through that, and I don't want to go down into the weeds on this right now, we just got to keep in mind that I don't believe we should go down the road of privatization. I don't believe we should go down the road of reducing the number of services that we do concerning our refuse, like charging extra for sofas and things like that. I mean, those are the things that, to put it in a really blunt way, very well could piss off our residents. So I don't know that we should go down that road in any way, shape, or form. So I would say don't waste your time looking at that. That's my comments.
Thank you, Alderman
Thank you.
Bessetti. Any other comments from the council? Alderman Budmats?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to thank Molly for taking the opportunity to put those funds that previously didn't show up in the budget and show us the excesses so that we're more transparent and fully aware of what funds are available for movement to other places. That's a refreshing change. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alderman Budmats. Any other comments or questions? If not, thank you again for the presentation. We'll continue with this conversation as the months progress. But I think for now, we can go ahead and move on to the second item on this evening's agenda, which is the American Rescue Plan Act ARPA discussion. For this, we'll start with Manager Sabo.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. A number of months ago at a committee of the whole meeting, I believe it was March, we had introduced and had a conversation about the ARPA funding which the city was receiving or set to receive at the time. At the time that we presented, we at that point were informed that there was about $3.1 million that was allocated to the city. Since then, we've been informed that the actual amount that we have received is 3.2, very slightly over 3.2 million. And so, since the time that Finance Director Talkington joined the organization, as well as myself, we took a look at what was originally presented to the council, which was a large infusion using the ARPA funds to help with underground utility infrastructure improvements, namely in the water fund, and really evaluate the ARPA fund, the allowed uses for the ARPA funding, and then come back as we went through the budget process to reaffirm how the city council ultimately decides and directs us to allocate those ARPA funds. So at this stage, I will go ahead and turn it over to Finance Director Talkington to give us a quick update and synopsis and seek council's direction on how we move forward. Ultimately, what we decide this evening will get incorporated into the budget document and be reflected within that document. And at this point, Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So the ARPA funding, or specifically our portion, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, they couldn't give us any more acronyms with ARPA and SLURF, and then tranche, right? We received the first installment or tranche a year ago. So that funding is essentially sitting in the utilities fund, and that waiting for us to make a decision on what we want to do with the ARPA funding. You were presented with Public Works' kind of the water projects and utility projects that this funding can go to, and that's an acceptable use under kind of the outlines that were laid out for local governments to use the funding. Another use, and we fall under the 10 million category of revenue replacement, but was to replace the public sector funding that revenues and use it to provide government services. So at this point, we have received, like I said, that second tranche. It's sitting there as pending in our bank account, so I know it's here. We have our full funding, but now it's the time to kind of use the funding, right? So the funding has a lot of requirements about what uses we can use. There are kind of 4 outlined areas of which you can use the funding for. But there were kind of strict deadlines on, you need to obligate the funding by 2024, and it has to be spent by 2026. And with what we've been seeing recently, we've been seeing, a delay in some of our road work because there were the strikes at the quarries. So some of that certainty I think we've had in the past is a little uncertain right now. So meeting that, obligation date and then making sure our project's completed is a little uncertain right now. So that's kind of one concern if we just specifically put the ARPA funding directly to projects. The others that, within those kind of 4 categories, there's other restrictions. You can use it for this, but not this. So there is some concern you do a project and maybe we thought it would be covered 100%, but now it's only covered 90%. Or if we don't meet that kind of spend date and we've only done 90% of the project, where are we going to find that other 10%? So to remove some of that and to lessen the reporting requirements and make it very easy to work with the federal government, the recommendation is to use the 3.2 million under that revenue replacement, and then we use that for general government services. So I'll report to the federal government essentially our payroll for the services in general government. But what we'll do then is to create what I was calling an ARPA parallel projects reserve. And we'll have it in this way. Recommended is to put 3 million and show it just as clearly as like the how I was showing the liability and health insurance reserve. Show it in that fund. So when we look at the utility fund, it'll show fund balance, and then it'll say the ARPA parallel reserve, and we will call out specifically what projects we're designating with that $3 million. Then the remaining little over 200,000, put that and do that same reserve, but in the general fund, and use that for kind of potential economic development projects that are coming. Now, right now, if we do it right now, and I'll put it into the budget if that's direction, it'll show that it'll be kind of projects pending that water master plan. Council will see this. It's being currently done right now in Public Works with the help of Baxter Woodman, and they'll come back to council January, February of 2023 with what projects that plan outlines is really the priority for us to tackle and what we need to do with that utilities funding. So we can take that kind of water master plan and use it as a guide to identify exactly which projects we will use with the $3 million. So it gives you kind of a good layout to then identify exactly how you want to use it. And then for that $2 million, it'll be when a potential project comes up, we'll come out, come back to council and say, this is a project we think falls into this reserve category, and then we would call out that project within that reserve. But it really helps us doing it this way, get that money obligated and spent through the federal government, so we're not risking any point of having to return some of it or having to come up with some other funding to cover where we thought was covered. And then it gives us an opportunity to really lift those restrictions and put it to projects what we know or need is the priority. So using that water master plan to really identify those. And then, taking advantage of these opportunities with economic development, but still trying to stay transparent, letting our residents know we're not just using this for general government. We really are making an effort. We're going to identify it and show you exactly how we're applying $3.2 million to projects to get work done. That's the recommendation on using the ARPA funding. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you for that, Finance Director Talkington. And just to put it in simple terms, essentially, we're going to utilize the money now. However, that the $3 million will be earmarked and available for future projects. So yes, it shows as being spent, but essentially, we will have those dollars available for the future projects, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that, I appreciate that model now. To Director Talkington's point, it does buy us a little bit of time, so we don't have to make hasty decisions and ultimately inadvertently squander those funding opportunities that we receive. I also have a series of initiatives that I'd like to bring forward. Tonight's not the night, but I have a digital strategy in terms of our city's digital transformation. I've been speaking with our CIO to find out a little bit more about our current network within the municipality. And this gives me the time to make it a little bit more cohesive and make it digestible. So that way when it does come forth, hopefully there's support behind it. But ultimately, this recommendation buys us the time to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments or questions from the council? Alderman Budmats?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, based on your comments, does it make sense for us to create a fund? We can call it the ARPA Parallel Fund, and then have parameters set around that fund having a balance or the spending of that fund, so that we restrict ourselves to using those funds the way they were we originally intended to use them, but allow ourselves the latitude to do it over the time frame that best suits the city in terms of expenditures and buying when the costs are appropriate.
And normally, if it were something that would be longer term in nature, I would create a separate fund. In this case, I don't think it's going to be such a long life that you would create a fund, but the restrictions and kind of project kind of constraints you want to put on it, we can write whatever into that reserve and put it, on the documents to show like this is held for this purpose and get as kind of detailed as you want to. So we can still kind of have that transparency around it. But we could create a fund. That is possible. I just normally, because it's such a short amount of time in the life of the government, I wouldn't normally create a fund for this.
I'm just trying to create the process where everybody sees that we're trying to use and spend it in the intended manner. Before, I understand, before the money any processes would change due to a change in federal mandate, but once it's spent, but at least we would be able to use the parallel funds to do what was originally thought about and improve the infrastructure, which is desperately needed.
Yeah, so that is one avenue we could go down.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Sunoika?
I just wanted to follow up and clarify with Alderman Budmetz. Is the concern that perhaps a future council might misuse the funds, and we want to make sure that these funds are being directed appropriately?
I have no idea what tomorrow could bring, and expenditures could go up in other areas or whatever. But I'm trying to make sure that we end up, or those who follow us, end up spending it on underground utilities or roads or something that provides long-term, like 30-year, 50-year lifespan to the community, rather than solving an intermittent financial crisis that may arise.
Director Talkington, is there any additional restrictions that we could place then for the future on the reserve itself?
So any council action you could take on it, we can, you can write a resolution or an ordinance, and you can always put restrictions around it in that more formal manner that way versus just relying on a budget ordinance that adopts it that way. So we could take a kind of separate step to identify what that reserve will be outlined and identified for. So you could kind of add that second layer of reserve to those funds.
It looks like the city manager, Sabo, would also like to speak on that.
The one thing I wanted to note is these funds are different than what you would see in an enterprise fund. They're by accounting standards really unrestricted for the council's determination on how those funds are to be used. This council can set a policy and can write into the budget, and it can remain very transparently in the budget that the funds are allocated for a certain purpose. There isn't necessarily a mechanism where it could be bound perpetually into the future, where 10 years from now we still haven't expended all of those funds, that a future council can't say, based on today's needs, we are going to allocate it to X, Y, Z. So my answer to that question is not entirely, but I think that the way that the allocation is written, the way that we frame it in the budget, certainly can reflect the intentions and desires of the city council, so that anyone in the future, public as well as the council, can see exactly how the intent of those funds were to be used.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Alderman Bissesi?
Yeah, my question's more for Public Works. I would assume that our infrastructure needs that we were all briefed on several months ago are going to cost well more than the $3 million. So I don't know if there would be any, if used for the intended purposes, any real reason why we would need to do anything long-term. I actually do have a concern that it potentially could wind up getting used for something that this council has not intended it to be used for. But I just want to confirm that my suspicion is correct.
Yes, you are correct. The overall project would cost more than $3 million to do everything that would be laid out in that master plan.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Bissesi. Any other comments or questions regarding the requested plan of action from Finance Director Talkington? I guess pose a straw vote this evening for those in favor of utilizing the funding at this time as laid out by Director Talkington and Manager Sabo. Those in favor? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That will swiftly take us to our third item of this evening, which is the Video Gaming Establishment License Code Enforcement discussion. And this is continued by Manager Sabo. Manager Sabo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just briefly follow up on where we left off at last month's Committee of the Whole meeting. As you may recall, the City Council last month had a brief discussion about how the city goes about enforcing the city code related to video gaming establishments and what happens if a violation occurs. As was presented last month, the way that the city code is established is that the licenses that are issued for video gaming establishments are issued through the city's liquor code. And that is consistent with how other communities are handling video gaming as well. The direction and request for follow-up at the last meeting was to reevaluate what the fine amounts were for the city of Rolling Meadows comparative to those other communities in the area that also allow video gaming. Procedurally, if there is a violation issued, a hearing would be scheduled before the city's liquor control commissioner, which is the mayor by code. And the mayor then would have the ability to hear evidence, consider testimony, and then ultimately issue a finding, which in the code allows the mayor to suspend, revoke, and impose fines. Suspend or revoke and impose fines, I should say. Within the code, the slide behind you, this is actually within the staff report as well. This slide that's presented reorganizes the communities. The one in the packet is by alphabetical order of the municipality. This, I've reordered the communities by the fine amounts. So you'll see that Meadows is somewhat in the middle of the pack. Our code is set up such that the fines that could be levied are sequential. So first offense would be not to exceed $1,000 within a 12-month period, $1,500 for a subsequent, and then $2,500 thereafter, not to exceed in a 12-month period, $15,000. There's a high range and a low range, and I'll just identify them here. So if you take a look at Schaumburg, they're not less than 100, nor exceeding 50,000. So there's a lot of range and ability to allocate a fine amount that's given to the Liquor Control Commission in Schaumburg. Then I also included Palatine's, which also is sequential, similar to the way that Rolling Meadows does it, but with higher amounts allowed for the subsequent violations. And so for this evening, opening the floor for any questions from staff as far as how our process works, but if the council does desire to ultimately amend the code and authorize the Liquor Control Commissioner to impose larger fines than what's included in our code, we would seek that direction and feedback this evening. That would ultimately come back to the council in the form of an ordinance, which would amend the code. I do want to note one thing which is that because the fine amount is tied into, because the video gaming is tied into the liquor code, this fine also applies to violations for liquor violations. So if an establishment sells to an underage individual, there's any sort of violation of the liquor code within the city, these fines apply applicably to those establishments as well. That's the same for all of these communities that you see on this chart. So because the communities are regulating their video gaming establishment licenses through the liquor code, the change here would impact both violations. It would authorize the liquor commissioner to impose the fines that ultimately we either maintain the existing fines or we change, both for video gaming establishment licenses as well as liquor licenses. And so I'm happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Sabo. Do we happen to have a list of what the violations are for liquor-related offenses? Naturally, sale of underage alcohol to a minor is an offense and a violation. Do we have?
So
I don't have
the initial, some of it is written out in state statute, and then I'm not sure exactly if our local code itemizes the specific violations. The dollar amounts that are here are for the Liquor Control Commissioner specifically to be able to levy a fine against a liquor establishment that is licensed who is found to have a violation.
And the reason I ask that is because I'd like to see the degree and nature of violations and severity, because I do know that violations range and are on a spectrum, but as I mentioned last time during this conversation, I am okay with more severe penalties for offenders, and I think it would go to suit that the severity also follow on the sale of alcohol. So I know in the packet you had mentioned Palatine, and I see those prices there, and I would be in favor of following or subscribing to a model in terms of the dollar amounts that are provided in Palatine that we would do here. That would be my ideal direction. Council, have any comments? Alderman O'Brien?
I would say I'm in full support of increasing the fines, because I mean, if they are making violations, we probably don't want them necessarily have their business here, and the ordinances are in place for a reason. We've got great staff that enforces them, so that they're there for that. And I do like your recommendation, Mr. Mayor, on the pallet. Like, I like it being first offense, second offense, third offense, because the other ones I'm reading, it's a range, and at that point, I could see us getting, it's arbitrary, is that we find entity X this, but entity Y that. So I do like where we would call out. So that would be my recommendation. I'm very comfortable with the increasing the fine to the limits that Palatine might have. I have no problem with that. And I do like calling out first time, second time, so then there takes away any ARPA ambiguity between why one place was one and one was the other. I agree.
Thank you. Alderman Veneziano and Sonoyka.
Thank you. So what would happen after the third violation and they paid their, I'm just going off of Palatine, they paid their $15,000, their third violation, they paid their $15,000 for the max for the year? What happens?
Revocation.
Yeah, it's at the commissioner's discretion, but
Okay.
a revocation or a suspension or another 15,000, but it's ultimately at the commissioner's
Okay.
discretion.
Because I could see that for some of these gaming cafes, 15,000 for a year is a drop in the hat, and, well, it's been a year, I'm gonna, you know, I paid my 15,000 fee, and I'm gonna just keep doing what I'm doing, so.
And not to throw a curveball here, but previously when we spoke about this, I'm even under the favor of two-strike policy from my position. I think one time is an oops, the second time it seems like we have a chronic issue, and that's not an issue I want to have in our city. But I won't always be the mayor. Alderman Sonoyka?
So I guess in response to Alderman O'Brien's comment about arbitrary fines, I'm sure that there's some precedent through the arbitration process in order to determine what would be a fair and reasonable penalty for a specific violation. Is that not, how does the process currently work? I know we discussed this earlier, but when I'm looking at Schaumburg, to allow that amount of breadth, it sounds like it would be able to handle a range of violations.
So typically with these processes, you would look at precedent, you know, what has the city issued in the past? You can take that into account. But again, I think the discretion really lies with the commissioner and what the findings are from the testimony, from the scenario. There's a lot of discretion involved in, you know, were there mitigating circumstances? What exactly occurred? Did they attempt to correct the issue quickly? Did they try to hide it? There's just so many different varieties of scenarios that come up with code enforcement. And so it would be taking into account what the situation is and then applying a fine structure that the commissioner ultimately determines is appropriate for the situation that occurred.
So is there a reason necessarily to check by violation for the liquor commissioner to say it doesn't matter, given all of those other different circumstances, if this is a first violation, you can't charge more than, and if we were to adopt this to Palatine, you can't charge more than $5,000 for the violation?
So it's really a policy decision of the council. There really isn't a set state Illinois municipal code approach or any sort of arbitration or process that I've seen at least that sets this is the fine amounts that are to be determined. It's a discretion and policy decision of the city.
Well, so I guess what I don't understand then is what would be the risk of providing the ability of the liquor commissioner to have that large range between 100 and 50,000, for example?
Not to put words in Alderman O'Brien's mouth, but I think one of the areas that maybe you were trying to temper yourself from was just the exposure to the liquor commissioner giving a fine at X amount to one violation or one violator, and then another violator of a similar violation, but not necessarily the exact same, and setting a different price, I think we could then potentially exhaust ourselves if that second violator was to claim discrimination of some sort, and then it would just be this exhaustive exercise of trying to prove that it's not discriminatory in any capacity. It was just a decision made by the liquor commissioner, and just by keeping it in terms of standards and just flat fee amounts, that we kind of eliminate or potentially eliminate any of those discriminatory claims.
I understand. So then it sounds like then the council perhaps is more interested in maintaining a first and second offense at a minimum, in addition to all the other tools, but just increasing that amount. Is that what's being asked right now of the council?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Budmats?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I don't see, I see that only Rolling Meadows and Roselle in this chart are the municipalities which limit the amount which may be imposed per year. I don't see a reason to limit the amount which may be imposed per year, as there's no limit into the number of violations that somebody may be guilty of before they lose their license, according to this chart. So I would say I agree with Alderman O'Brien that the Palatine model seems to be good, that you wouldn't be able to exceed 5,000 for the first, but I think it gives the commissioner discretion to make the fine lower if it's appropriate in his or her opinion. And then likewise the second and the third to 10 and 15,000, but I don't see a reason why we should limit it to 15,000. Because there's some people, if they got a $15,000 fine, it might put them out of business. There's some people who would look at the 15,000 fine and giggle and say, I could care less about your rules. And so I just want to, that's the entities that I want to make sure that we still have the ability to change their business practices to fall in line with our regulations. So I would suggest whatever we do, we remove the limitation for an annual fine or a maximum annual fine over a 12-month period.
Thoughts from the council on that? Alderman O'Brien and Bessetti?
No, I'm not opposed to that, and I should clarify, thanks for pointing that out, Alderman Budmats. I'm comfortable with, it says strike one is 5K, strike two is 10, not to exceed. I would like to see that struck from ours. And then we get back to the point that the mayor also made, is that, hey, first time is 5, it takes away any ambiguity. So I'm comfortable remove that. That's what I meant when I first spoke, is their dollar limit seemed okay to me. And we just go, boom, first time's 5, 10, 15, and then I'm comfortable removing, hopefully by that time, their license would be revoked, but I don't want to speak for the commissioner. But I don't have a problem removing the 12-month maximum.
And can we bake in there a revocation, like after a certain amount of violations, just it's automatic revocation? Can that be done?
I don't see why not. I believe you could.
You could do that if your code provided for that, but you would be relinquishing some discretion from the liquor commissioner in that regard. So that's, again, a council decision, but
I'm just curious. Alderman Bessetti, then Veneziano.
Okay, I was, Alderman O'Brien basically took my words out of my mouth. Just a flat rate for the first time, then the second time, and then I think it's up to the commissioner what happens at that point with that business. What I'm wondering, though, is if there's a way where the gaming could be taken away without the ability to sell liquor being taken away. They would have to change their liquor license or something.
Wouldn't they have to apply for a different liquor license than if they had their gaming license revoked?
so the way our code is written right now, if you're a gaming cafe, it's one single license.
Yeah.
And the gaming accessory has the second gaming license. So the way our code is written right now, that would not practically make sense, because the gaming cafe would not be able to still serve liquor and just not game. But
It
with
wouldn't
respect to
behoove
the
them to do
state's
that. Yeah.
liquor, if there was an issue with the gaming at the state level, automatically, they are not operating a gaming establishment at the local level.
If I can also add one thing, so I think what's also important to note is if a violation is, if there's ultimately a violation issued by the city is required to also inform the Illinois Gaming Commission and the Liquor Commission. So there's multiple agencies that are involved in the disciplinary process in the event that a violation occurs. So we are typically the first step of that process. The state looks to us as the local enforcement agency to go through that procedure, the local procedural steps. But there may be additional fines or impositions from the state commissions based on what they determine the violation, or based on the determinations from the violation as well.
Thank you. Alderman Bessetti, do you have any further?
No, I think that covers it.
Alderman Veneziano?
Thank you. So, I appreciate that it would come, that something may come up additional from the state. However, we know for a fact in our many discussions of gaming cafes that the state doesn't always see gaming cafes the same that we want to see them here in Rolling Meadows. So I want to really kind of take that out of the equation. But my concern is that liquor commissioners are going to come and go and change in future years. We worked really hard as a council to reform the gaming cafe, the licenses, to get it what the envision was intention, or what the intentions of it was to begin with. So I don't want to put all our cards in one basket here and hope that that next liquor commissioner sees those gaming license that we worked so hard to establish, to see it a different way. I want it black and white. This is how it is. And so I am in full support that 2 strikes, revocation. If you can't follow the rules, you came in here, you got your license, you knew what the rules were, period.
May I add something too? Just one of the questions that was asked was also regarding what kind of issues result in maybe a violation of the liquor license. And I did have a chance to pull up the provisions of the code. There are many provisions related to a liquor license, like sanitation, hours and days of sale. So those are occurrences that could take place that would be a violation of your liquor license if they sold after hours or on a day not authorized. Or, for instance, if they didn't have a pour license, they had a retail license, but they had some kind of event where they poured liquor. That's another occurrence that could result in a violation of a liquor license. And so when you're thinking about establishing the code, the fine provisions, think about those occurrences as well, which may be deemed more minor in nature, and maybe, it's up to the council, of course, but may or may not justify, having an automatic revocation if it's a second offense, or an automatic fine of $5,000 it's a first offense. That's why every single provision that you see from the other communities also has a not less than or not to exceed amount in the code.
And I appreciate you bringing up that spectrum, a violation of pouring maybe 20 minutes after hours or something and then being penalized $5,000 on the first hit. It is a little bit steep. But I also want to utilize this as a mechanism to keep people keep these entities in place, and have them mind their P's and Q's. So I'm okay with keeping it at just the first offense, $5,000. But again, council has discretion on this as well.
And in addition, the code provides, as it stands now, that in addition to a revocation or a suspension, a fine can also be issued at that same time. So it doesn't limit the ability to just issue a fine or just suspend or revoke. You can do both.
Okay. Alderman Budmats?
2 things. The first thing is, for example, time. Somebody could walk into the Jewel at 10 to 11 on a Sunday morning and buy a 12-pack and generate a $5,000 fine. And the second one could mean that Jewel couldn't sell liquor anymore, which probably would be a huge hit for us as far as taxes go. So I would be careful about automatic revocation. The question also, it's great that we can levy a fine. What are the rights under our code for the person who receives the fine to appeal to, and what rights do they have to appeal the liquor commissioner's decision, and legally, both in Rolling Meadows and then in the court system?
There would be no appeal somewhere within the city of Rolling Meadows, but they could appeal to the administrative decision of the liquor commissioner. I believe to the court, the circuit court.
Yeah,
They have the appellate right.
It's a quasi-judicial proceeding, so because of the due process and it being ultimately, a revocation is a taking of what is a license. It's given, there is that administrative process, and typically it's an administrative appeal on procedure, I believe, is typically the process, so it isn't necessarily an appeal on necessarily the dollar amount, but it would be an evaluation of the process. So for that reason, these hearings have a court reporter present to reflect the exact testimony and information that was presented, the consideration and rationale from the commissioner as to why the fine or ultimate decision, revocation, suspension, or combination thereof was determined.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that the Palatine thing that we were looking to model has not to exceed 5,000. It doesn't mean it has to be 5,000. It just means it can't exceed for the first offense. So I think there are some situations, if it was the Jewel and somebody bought it at 10 to 11, I'm not sure that we really want to fine Jewel $5,000 for that, by comparison to, a much more grievous offense selling it to a 16-year-old. I mean, so there has to be some leeway and some discretion allowed to and exercised by the liquor commissioner, no matter who he or she may be in the future.
So then does the council ultimately feel as though the model Palatine has written up here not to exceed $5,000 for the first violation and $10,000 for the second violation, $15,000 for a third or subsequent violation within a period of 12 months? Quick show of hands, all those in favor of subscribing to that same model? Okay. And then Alderman Snoyka, I see you didn't, and so we can engage in input, so hopefully we can flesh it out so it suits Rolling Meadows.
Yeah, I would say the only thing that I would add to this is I would not continue to 3. I think that the suggestion for 2 is sufficient for us, as opposed to having 3 within a 12-month period.
Okay. What do other council members feel about the 2-strike situation? I'm pretty sure you know my stance.
I was going to say, thank you, Mr. Mayor, I was in favor of that, but thanks to Attorney Wolf pointing out the spectrum of then, and also the points that Alderman Bud Matz brings up too, is because I think the way the code's written now, it could be revoked at any time. Is that correct? Because it's an honor that they have that.
That's
for lack of a better
correct.
term. So we could revoke it on the first offense if it was gregarious enough, correct?
Correct.
So I'm okay with not having the automatic revocation after 2 offenses, learning the spectrum. It could be for a sanitary thing, selling 10 minutes early versus selling to a minor, and obviously we would defer that to the staff and the commissioner's expertise. So I'm okay with not the automatic revocation, given what Attorney Wolf shared in the spectrum of that, because knowing that we could pull it anytime anyways.
Alderman Bessetti. Thank you, Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, I do like the insight that Attorney Wolf brought to us. I'm kind of thinking like this is almost like, it's almost like your prescription plan, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. There's those offenses that, take Alderman Bud Matt's scenario regarding the Jewel, or, you pour a drink 5 minutes after you close. Let's say you did that a third time. Auto revocation is not good. I'm not even sure if, some of those fines at that level would be appropriate. So I'm wondering if it was split in, there's like minor offenses and major offenses. Is there some way to like tier it so that we could get, this is what the fine is if it's this type of offense or this group of type of lower level offenses, or is that just getting too? too hairy to try and,
I think it's,
Somebody
I think it's a
go.
little complex. In the spirit of this fine structure, it's to enforce good behavior, right? And so
Right.
I'd like to see the penalties be severe in hopes that it keeps everybody within the parameters that they should be operating within.
okay.
Alderman
Then I would-
Veneziano?
Then I would be in favor of not automatically revoking after 3. I think it should be left up to the commissioner to use their judgment.
Okay. Alderman Veneziano and
Oh.
Attorney Wolf, you can
Okay.
share, or do you go ahead?
So Alderman Bessetti just proved my point, like, to the T. If in, future instance here, that Alderman Bessetti was liquor commissioner, his view on different situations are completely different than Mayor Gallo. So, I mean, this just proved my point that it's in the eye of the beholder getting the information. And so this is where I feel that we really need to have this in black and white on what our expectations are and what we want. So Alderman Bessetti just said, oh, three times serving over, 5 o'clock, not that big of a deal. Well, we have these rules for a reason. Like, we need to enforce them. So I think that just proved my point that we can't leave it in the hands of one person because we never know who that one person's going to be, period.
Thank you. Attorney Wolf?
The other thing I wanted to point out is the language that we're looking at and what exists in our code and what we're seeing as a sample for Palatine is that final violation, whether it's a second or third violation, includes a subsequent violation or any subsequent violation. So it's really just establishing tiers of maximum fines. And that's what the council is looking at now. Because each day that a violation occurs is a separate it could be a separate violation. So there could be instances where there are multiple violations issued because, it's
ongoing.
happening on a daily basis and it's not being rectified. So I just want the council to, have that perspective. We're establishing the fines based upon, how many occurrences take place.
Thank you, Attorney Wolf.
Yeah, I revoke my straw vote. Unanimous.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Alderman
No,
O'Brien?
I was just going to say, too, I mean, it's kind of like what we did with the gaming cafes. It's like, I understand Alderman Veneziano's point, but a new council or commissioner could make the change of what we have in place today for anything on the books. So we're doing, obviously, our due diligence the best that we can, like we did for gaming.
For now.
For now, right, for now, let alone 2025, 2045, yeah.
Okay. So a quick show of hands then, just to yeah, the Palatine, I'm sorry, I'm reading through one more though. Something caught my eye. Never mind though. I don't want to take it in the weeds there. Show of hands, who wants to follow or subscribe to what Palatine's implemented? It's unanimous.
We'll go ahead and prepare an ordinance and bring that back before the city council for formal consideration.
Thank you, Manager Sabo.
Thank you.
That'll move us on to the fourth item for this evening, which is the Illinois Route 53 Environmental Noise Study Proposal and Related Information. For this, we're going to defer to Director of Public Works, Aaron Groskopf. Welcome to the podium.
Gonna have to raise this up a bit. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I appreciate you having me tonight, and hopefully, which is the first of many, many presentations to this group. So, without further ado, let's get into it, because it is a very exciting topic. So, sound barriers. I wanted to start off with a little bit of background information on the project that we have. We are looking at the corridor of Illinois Route 53 between Euclid Avenue and Algonquin Road. So we're encompassing that area, which is controlled by IDOT Region 1. And in this approved budget year for 2022, we have $25,000 to perform this environmental noise study. And going into that a little bit on the next slide here, what that environmental noise study is going to encompass is a little bit of taking a look and examination of just the noise. So we're going to see throughout this presentation that the process to kind of look at and see and determine what IDOT uses to approve a sound barrier is pretty extensive. What this $25,000 will get us will essentially be a decibel level. So they're going to measure the entire corridor through Illinois' Route 53, and they're going to take a look at what the actual decibels are, 60, 70, 80, which would be extremely loud, throughout that corridor. So we are working with Seabell, and we had a proposal from them, which was included in your packet. And we're also working with Kimley Horn and Trans Systems, both who are very good with environmental studying, and both of those are going to give us proposals for the same type of work. The analysis will follow all Federal Highway Administration and IDOT specifications to make sure that IDOT will accept it. And the budget amount, again, is $25,000. And as I stated, this would just cover the noise analysis, not so much the sound modeling, the traffic noise impact, and the traffic abatement analysis. All of that stuff would be extra. All of those are items that IDOT would have to look at. However, we can use this noise study in an application for federal funding opportunities. So a little bit of details on the actual proposal itself that Seabell has provided. The study is to consider about 1.8 miles of corridor and sound wall, 2 days of noise monitoring. There will be 5 to 7 locations that they're going to monitor, and they will include a technical noise report. I wanted to briefly show this. This is on the northeast corridor of Kirchhoff and I-53. We have some elevation challenges, so if the city did proceed with this, building the sound barrier on their own, we would have to kind of tackle a lot of these areas where there'd be right-of-way acquisitions, right-of-way easement or easement acquisitions, and a lot of these elevation challenges that we see where the elevation kind of drops off that bridge deck, and we might have to build a 25-foot wall, and that will dramatically increase the cost of building the sound barrier. So that's one of those potential challenges. I wanted to kind of briefly explain that as we move into the IDOT information portion of the presentation here. So I wanted to give a little brief synopsis on what they do for a noise process. So if IDOT comes in, they perform a type 1 project, this is the process that would get instigated through that. So first they determine that type 1 project is performed. They'll perform the noise monitoring, which is what the budgeted amount we have for this year is for consideration. Then they'll decide if that noise monitoring meets the 67 decibel according to the report, and that's for residential areas, which is what the Illinois 53 corridor that we're looking at predominantly is. Then they will perform a sound modeling study. If that passes through, they'll perform a traffic noise and impact analysis. If that goes through, they'll perform the traffic noise abatement analysis. So these are all steps that have to be completed before IDOT will even move to consider a sound barrier, and that's all laid out in their policy. They call it, if prior steps are completed, noise abatement is likely to be implemented. So that's something that we want to remember as we walk into this. Type 1 construction, so what does that mean exactly? Construction of a highway or extension of a highway to a new location. Any physical alterations, so addition of a through lane, auxiliary lanes, additions or modifications to interchange lanes or ramps. An example of this is Palatine on Route 53 north of Dundee Road, where it kind of terminates. They have a very old wooden sound wall structure there. That was triggered by the extension of Route 53. So I actually spoke with their director earlier. It was well before his time, so it was plus 20 years ago. But that was triggered by an extension. That is something, that is a project that would meet it, and that area met the criteria for the sound barrier. So they have a sound barrier going along through there. Some general information about IDOT and how their process works. They do not do cost sharing with the municipality. So if I were to break this down a little bit more for you, so when the cost sharing comes in, for example, if we look at the tollway process, if they come in, they do a noise analysis and they see, okay, we have 20 benefited receptors throughout the corridor that we're looking at, and a sound barrier is going to cost $500,000. The standard threshold is about $30,000 per benefited receptor. If you take that $500,000 and you divide it by 30 benefited receptors, if it does not meet 30,000, they are not going to build the wall for you. However, they will chip in whatever money they have budgeted for that and give it to you as a kind of a a helping hand for you to build the wall, but you would have to be on your right-of-way. The tollway has that process. IDOT does not. So IDOT does not do any type of cost sharing with municipalities in that regard, which is a downer. The tollway does very, very much like building sound barriers. They will not allow any sound barrier to be constructed in their row outside of their own type 1 project analysis. So if we do an analysis and we find that there is noise above 80 decibels, they will not let us construct a sound wall in their right-of-way. It would have to be constructed in our own. And again, they will not consider any noise abatement outside of type 1 projects. So even if we submitted a full gambit of analyses and impacts to them, they would not consider the project unless they were specifically doing work there. So if the IDOT does perform type 1 maintenance, I want to include this in here. They will do all of the studies for us. They will financially cover everything. They will put it in the right-of-way, and they will cover the long-term maintenance and be responsible for the life of the wall. Cost. So here's kind of the big thing. What I wanted to show you here is what's included and excluded in the cost that we kind of presented here in this packet. Included is the purchase of the sound wall, essentially, the material, and the rough installation cost of that barrier. Excluded is any utility relocations, any right-of-way or easement acquisitions, any long-term maintenance, and the design and construction engineering, which is typically around 15%, along with the contingency. So there's a lot of excluded costs in this. And the price that we had through talking with different consultants and different agencies is around $50 per square foot is what we're looking at right now. So the total cost of the wall with only the included items that I just told you about is around the upper $9 million threshold. If you did include the engineering costs on top of that number, without including it on top of all the utility relocations and the right-of-way purchases and easement acquisitions, that number would be in the just above $11 million range. Now that is an estimate. That is just kind of guessing on what we have for the total length of the wall and the current numbers. It could go down and it could go up. So that's the best number that we have right now. I wanted to share a little bit of additional information to you. The Arlington Park development is something that I think everybody has heard about. This is possibly coming in, and it would most likely, I can't give any definitive answers, but it most likely will look at the Route 53 corridor interchange there between at Euclid, which is kind of part of this considered project area that we're looking at. The improvements will likely be type 1. And it is possible that they will look at this for noise abatement. However, this area will not affect the entire corridor that we're looking at for this project. This is just going to affect around 250 to 300 feet of that interchange, according to IDOT's noise policy. So that is a potential. Looked at IDOT's 5-year transportation plan that was just sent out. They have no call-outs for widening or doing any improvements to the section of Route 53 that we're looking at. And since that route does dead end pretty north of us or just north of us, the likelihood of any widening is pretty minimal unless some sort of development comes in to spur that. So in summary, we have a budget allowance this year for $25,000 to fund the environmental noise analysis. If the noise analysis is completed, we can use it for possible funding opportunities through the federal funding, and IDOT will not consider performing any noise analysis or outside noise analysis from other agencies if there is no type 1 projects being performed. The cost for the barrier installation without other items will be around $9 million range, and future development of Arlington Park could impact a portion of the Route 53 corridor. So that's pretty much the summary of what we have here for you. Does anybody have any questions that I can help answer?
Thanks, Director Groskopf. I did a little bit of research. I am no expert by any means on any of this, but I learned that when a sound wall is erected, the most that the sound wall does is decrease the noise by 11 decibels, roughly. And the decibel reduction isn't even in the immediate vicinity. It's more about the decibel level that carry beyond the actual highway or the heavily trafficked road. What are your thoughts, and this might be naive of me to think that, the 5-year plan shows no construction for that area, that corridor of 53, but in our ability as a city to come together with our neighboring cities and prompt IDOT to use quiet pavement with electrification and the projection of the governor's wish of having 1 million electric vehicles on the road, by having fewer internal combustion engines on the road and having electric vehicles and quiet pavement, that may be better than sound walls in and of themselves. But I agree and believe that we should get the study done since we have the money earmarked for it, and that study can be a catalyst for future opportunities. But what are your thoughts on my naivety when it comes to convincing an agency like IDOT to utilize different forms of aggregate on future projects?
Yeah, so I mean, if all the municipalities kind of got together and nudged them, anything is possible to accomplish that. I mean, it's IDOT, so it would be an uphill battle, but by no means is it impossible to get them to look at alternatives for different areas. If they went to do, for example, like a Type 3 or Type 4, which would just be a resurfacing project, certainly if you combined with other agencies, you could give them nudges and pokes and try to get them to move toward a certain way. I think your idea of kind of the future with the electric vehicles and having that kind of noise reduction is ideally the long-term solution to sound barriers, because you won't need them with the minimal amount of traffic noise besides what is coming off of the tires.
Correct. And according to the Illinois Asphalt and Pavement Association, this quiet pavement is heavily utilized. I just don't understand why we don't utilize it within our highways where communities are set. I understand where the need might not be necessary when the highways are traveling through a manufacturing zone or what have you, but in an area such as ours where there are residential homes on either side, should be explored a lot more readily than what it has been. So using our collective voice and our neighbor's voice, if there is any opportunity in that. So,
Sure, we can certainly find out.
okay. Any other comments, questions? Alderman Budmats?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So question, the proposal from CBEL says 2 days, but I'm not sure, is that consecutive days or is that just 2 days? Because if it's consecutive days, I would suggest a Sunday and a Monday, so we have a baseline so that if there were a stadium built for Sunday Bears games, that we would have a benchmark to compare the noise after the Bears stadium to prior to the Bears stadium, and possibly create some kind of evidence so that we can show that the impact that the stadium's had on our community.
Absolutely. There is no set days, so we can choose them. I believe they have kind of a policy in place as to they do want a weekend and a weekday, so they can have a full range. And Sunday and Monday is something that we can certainly look at.
Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
No, thanks for the additional information. I was one that, just reading the packet as preparing, I'm like, I'm not one for spending money twice, like that we would do it now and then do it potentially since it doesn't carry weight with IDOT and the requirements, but seeing the estimate costs, it's a pinhead in the bucket into what this would cost overall, and I'm one for if we approve the budget for this year and it was earmarked for that. My only question is, obviously this would be something done by year end. Like, do we know when this would be done?
Yes, it would for sure be done by year end.
Okay.
The noise analysis would not, like, it's a 2-day process. The longest part will be kind of putting together that technical report.
If we receive council's direction this evening, we would bring back the approval of that proposal in a resolution form to the next council meeting.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ray. That was just my concern. Like, we're paying for something twice, but the drop in the bucket, I think, will give us some direction of, do we pursue something at a future date, or did it not meet the requirements?
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the sound wall? Alderman Sumaika?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is an item that has, as you can see, a lot of this area and this corridor falls within Ward 7 on both the east and the west side. So I've had not only a number of individual residents that have reached out with sincere complaints about the noise levels, but entire homeowners associations have reached out. This has been a topic at their annual meetings, and so they're really looking forward to this. They've been asking for this for years, so I'm really excited to have a technical report to bring back to them and to the residents of the HOAs to show, you're not crazy. It's actually 95 decibels where this is at, which is, X amount above the federal limits. And so even if we don't pursue a sound wall, or we can't necessarily collectively pursue a solution with, an innovative solution with IDOT, with some of these more targeted areas, we can be able to say, yeah, this is actually an issue that we will have to address at some point and include in our capital planning documents going forward. So I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much, staff, for putting it together. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Alderman Budmats?
And I'm assuming it's safe to assume that if there were lanes added for the potential Bear Stadium, that would be a type 1 event, and that could trigger the need, if we had in place a study which showed that there was already a need that for sure would increase the likelihood of getting a wall installed and maybe possibly even extended.
Yes, so definitely, if there was a lane added, it would 100% constitute a type 1 project by IDOT, and that would automatically trigger on their end the noise analysis and kind of go through all of those steps that we outlined a little bit earlier. If there was something beyond their proposed scope, we could certainly engage them in that, but it's more than likely something that would have to go and kind of piggyback on our own right-of-way if it fell outside of their project area.
And if they finished all of the bridge work on both the Algonquin and the Kirchhoff bridges, and is any of that going to be widened or in any way altered?
I do not believe so.
No, a lot of that is cosmetic work more so than it is structural.
Thank you.
Any other comments regarding this subject? Quick show of hands for all those in favor of giving the green light to the sound wall.
Sound study.
Sound study, sorry. I'm talking about sound wall, sound study. Yeah, the study, not the wall.
have to bring the finance director back.
Not spending money on walls. No. Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Sound study.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Thank you, Director Grunskopf. Well, that concludes our agenda items this evening. So now I just look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Sunoika. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned at 9:06. Have a good night, everybody.